Hey friends, thanks so much for dropping by the New Moves channel. If you appreciate independent voices like mine, please do consider supporting me through WeChat Pay, as I'm 100% funded by you guys. On May 27, 2020, the Supreme Court of British Columbia, Canada finally ruled that Ms. Meng met the double criminality standard. That is, her actions were illegal in the United States and in Canada, which is unsettling. How could the US's arbitrary sanctions on Iran dictate the actions of global firms? This US extraterritorial attack has gotten the world's attention. Many observers see the attainment of Meng Wanzhou as part of the American attack on Chinese 5G dominance. It also follows a pattern of US economic aggression. Similar actions were taken against Japanese firms in the 1980s and against European ones in the 2010s. Today, the US has set their sights on mainland China's Huawei. We'll start by discussing similarities and differences with what happened in Japan and Europe. Let's start with Japan. Japan was the fastest growing country before China, especially in the 1980s. Rapid growth had brought Japan's economic power to an unprecedented level. Far ahead of the Soviet Union, Japan's GDP was once close to 70% of America's, which likely scared some American elites as a number of Japanese industries became prominent and challenged to take the lead away from the US. In addition to automobiles, the most important was the semiconductor industry. Let's jump back in time. In 1947, American William Shockley was credited with the success of the development of the most important invention of the 20th century, the transistor. Then Jack Kilby invented the world's first integrated circuit in 1958. The United States has always been the absolute leader in the semiconductor industry. However, that would all change in the mid-1980s, when Japan employed a devastating saturation campaign into the chips industry. The father of the Japanese semiconductor, Kamikaze, stepped up to help with the massive project, and he brought together several companies with different strengths. And so began the American nightmare. Modern semiconductor factories sprung up on the Japanese island of Kyushu, and it was once home to most of the semiconductor chip firms in Japan. Combined with Japanese precision and 24/7 assembly lines, large numbers of memory chips were produced and flooded into the market. This sent the price of 4K DRAM memory chips plummeting from $100 to $5, a price drop of 90%. Japan's share of global semiconductor production shot up from an initial 13% to 91% in 1988. And the market share quickly exceeded 50%, crushing American enterprises across the board. In 1981, AMD's profits plunged by 60%, and the next year Intel announced 2,000 job cuts. In 1985, Intel had its worst year ever, losing nearly $200 million, as Japanese firms kicked them out of the DRAM market. If IBM had not come to its rescue and bought its debt, Intel probably would have died in the 1980s. So how did the US reverse this overwhelming defeat? Their first counterattack was known as phishing. In 1982, FBI agents posed as IBM engineers and sold parts of IBM's core design documentation to Japanese firms as a consulting service. Unbeknownst to the Japanese businessmen, it was all a ruse. One such package was sold to Kenji Hayashi, a senior engineer at Hitachi at the time. The same tech transfer was sold to executives from Mitsubishi. The FBI's fake sale was a legal and propaganda grand slam. They now had evidence of Japanese corporate theft of US tech. This meant that the US not only received huge reparations from Japanese companies, but they could now cast Japan as a rogue state that only succeeds by stealing American secrets. Sounds familiar, right? America's second A-bomb on Japan came in the form of economics and media smears, but the effect was just as devastating. In 1987, 5 members of Congress led by Duncan Hunter smashed Toshiba radios on the steps of the US Capitol to celebrate the US imposing 100% tariffs on $300 million of Japanese chip exports. The US government also banned Fujitsu from buying California's Fairchild Semiconductor Company. Who would now fill the massive void of 70% of the global chip market which Japanese chips had occupied? Enter South Korea and its chaebols. After being colonized by Japan for 35 years and having suffered many atrocities like Japanese sex slavery, the South Koreans were more than willing to take Japan's share of the global chip market. However, at that time, South Korea's semiconductors made by Samsung were still in its infancy. Replacing Japan in this field would be like transporting a mountain on a fishing boat. So with the help of the United States, they were able to dismantle Japanese dominance through standardization. After the US tariffed all Japanese chips, this basically gave Samsung's two-way data access DRAM a monopoly. This is a perfect demonstration of how to smash a dominant industry into smithereens. Set up a sting, accuse opponents of theft, tariff galore, and use past victims to replace them. The plan worked out perfectly, as South Korea eventually replaced Japan in the semiconductor market. As I mentioned, they did this by standardizing South Korean chips so that all new computers could only use the type that were patented by Samsung. This basically made Japanese chips useless. The first chip war in human history was over. Japan fell from grace, and South Korea and Taiwan saw their semiconductor industries rise. At her peak, Japan accounted for 80% of the world's memory chips, and now it's close to zero. The collapse of pillar industries has plunged the entire Japanese economy into an endless abyss, and there's been no real recovery to this day. After eliminating Japan's dominant chip industry, the US was able to recapture its global control of advanced technology, but now Europe was about to form into a union. It was time again for the American Empire to weaponize its laws. Enter the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Originally, it was issued in response to a scandal involving American companies bribing public officials in other countries, but multinationals didn't like this, so they changed the law by buying off a congressman or two. However, it wasn't until 1998 that the law was changed into its most aggressive form. Long story short, the FCPA could now prosecute non-US firms, as long as it contracted in dollars or through servers based in the United States. This even included something as simple as using Google Mailbox. The US had now effectively given itself long-arm jurisdiction over the planet's corporate affairs, and the ability to wage economic war at will. The United States became the world's sole great power after it obliterated Japan's chip industry and brought down the Soviet Union. China hadn't recovered from its century of humiliation, so its GDP was still only 1/10 of the US. The only potential challenge to US hegemony was the EU. And in 1998, after years of negotiations, the integration of the European Union would be completed, and the euro would be launched the following year, emerging in the world as a new economic entity that could compete with the United States. At its heart are Germany and France. To celebrate the new EU, the US government passed a new law called the Patriot Act, and it was a world changer. Signed by George W. Bush after 9/11, it gave the US government the power to fight terrorism and use mass surveillance on foreign companies and their employees. So the bill became a covert economic weapon that could be used in the name of fighting terrorism. But it wasn't until 2013, when Snowden blew the whistle on the US's global surveillance system, that the story broke. Countries around the world would also learn about major US high-tech companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yahoo, Apple, and others were also sharing information with US intelligence under this Patriot Act. The first European country to fall into the American trap was Germany's Siemens. In 2008, Siemens had several of its subsidiaries outside the United States prosecuted for bribery in the nations of Argentina, Iraq, Venezuela, and elsewhere. Somehow, the FCPA now gave the US government global legal authority, and Siemens eventually paid a whopping $1.6 billion in fines. That set a record in the Act's 31-year history. So a non-US firm engaged in bribery outside the United States. But how does this concern the US, and how in the world did they know about it? Again, Snowden revealed the USA's control of the world's data and affairs when he declassified in an interview with German media that even if the activities of companies like Siemens don't involve national security, they'll still be monitored because they concern US national interests. And how did Siemens affect the national interests of the US? It's because Siemens was one of the top 3 global companies capable of producing state-of-the-art gas turbines. The other two included Alstom, the industrial jewel of France, and GE from the United States. Siemens and Alstom, both part of the European Union, were clearly a threat to US national interests. On April 14, 2013, a Boeing 777 lands at New York's JFK International Airport. Mr. Pierucci, an Alstom executive, was on the flight to the United States for business, and unfortunately, that flight would haunt him for the next 5 years of his life. Upon landing, the Frenchman was arrested by the FBI for allegedly bribing local officials in Indonesia in violation of US law. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Mr. Pierucci did not initially consider himself a direct participant in the bribery and refused to act as an informant, which angered the US sheriff. They decided to throw him into a prison for serious offenders, and he was given 2 options before the court hearings began. Option 1, plead not guilty and face 15 to 19 years in prison, and it takes 3 years just to prepare for the trial. Or option 2, plead guilty, agree to corporate fines, and get out in a few months. Anyone would have chosen the second option, so Pierucci pleaded guilty without hesitation. But it would be foolish to accept guilt so easily. The US government, like pirates, wanted more than just a ransom. What they really wanted was the jewel of France's high-tech industry. As soon as Pierucci was arrested, Alstom's GE went into takeover talks with Alstom. But France wasn't ready to sell off its world-leading energy firm. At the time, 1 in every 4 light bulbs in the world were powered by Alstom's tech. So if the French government wasn't willing to surrender its champion, how could the Americans get their hands on it? Over the next year, 4 more Alstom executives were arrested in the US, and if this continued, Alstom's board would have emptied out. So the day after the 4th exec was detained, it was April 24, 2014, and Alstom finally announced the sale of its energy business to America's GE. Mr. Pierucci's application for bail came 2 months later, and the deal was approved within days. However, a year had already passed since the promise of being released in just a few months. Alstom eventually reached a plea deal with the US Department of Justice, and they paid $772 million in fines. But after the Americans got the ransom and the high-tech jewel of France, they suddenly realized that US law should still be respected. So in 2017, the case went to trial, and Pierucci was sentenced to 30 months in prison. The hapless Frenchman was once again thrown into the slammer, and he wouldn't taste freedom again until September 2018. During this time, he thoroughly studied the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and numerous related cases. And 4 months after his release, he published his memoir, The American Trap, on January 16, 2019. In one fell swoop, the merger of the century, GE's purchase of Alstom, had been exposed in his book as the US's ability to prosecute anyone, anywhere based on her own laws, which caused the collapse of 2 European energy giants. Since then, GE has captured more than 60% of the global market. Siemens and later Mitsubishi are no longer in a position to compete. With Europe taken care of, let's get back to China. Can you guess who the Americans will target in mainland China? Here's a hint. Think about who's threatening US high-tech dominance. If you guessed Huawei and ZTE, good job. Those firms are way ahead of the US in 5G tech. Among the 21,500 global patents in 5G tech, Huawei ranks first with 3,100. Second is Samsung with 2,800 patents, followed by ZTE with 2,500 and LG with 2,300. Nokia and Ericsson have 2,100 and 1,500 respectively. Huawei and ZTE have developed more than a quarter of the world's total patents in 5G tech, and once you have the patents, you can basically set the industry standards. This was exactly how Japan's semiconductor industry was strangled by the US and South Korea in the 80s. Today, US firms don't even make the top 5 nations list in 5G patents. Even if you counted all the US companies that don't even have the manufacturing capacity for 5G equipment like base stations, the total number of US patents in 5G tech only amounts to 2,100, which is much less than the one Chinese company, ZTE. So the Americans went after China's ZTE. In 2017 and 18, the US assaults were massive and effective, just as they were against Toshiba, Alstom, and Siemens. ZTE was fined $2.3 billion by the US government, which is equal to 15 billion Chinese yuan, and all of their executives were fired. This again set a new record for civil and criminal penalties for export controls in the US. ZTE's $2.3 billion crime? Doing business with Iran. Now that's just fucked up. With ZTE paying the senseless US fine without a fight, the Americans realized that Chinese money was easy. Since then, the United States has put dozens of Chinese high-tech companies on its entity list, and then it started the hunt for its biggest fish, Huawei. On December 1st, 2018, shortly after ZTE paid off its US ransom, Meng Wanzhou, Huawei CFO, and the daughter of its founder, was detained by Canadian police while in transit, just like Alstom's Pierucci. Then, as usual, the US invoked the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, as it's been America's undefeatable weapon. To complete another extraterritorial legal attack, the US government had to scour the world for evidence of bribery. They even had FedEx ship Huawei packages from Japan and Vietnam back through the US so the agents could illegally search for any irregularities. But nothing was found. Then it activated the USA Patriot Act and declared with no evidence that Huawei had a backdoor to its communications products threatening the national security of the United States. In response, Huawei simply made its source code public. It was a bold and transparent move, but predictably, Western media just ignored it and pushed the US government narrative. The hunt for Huawei is different from the ZTE case, because in international trade and negotiations, Huawei staff have always been cautious and ethical. And before the US launched its China Threat campaign, US allies were willing to work with Huawei. It's now been 2 years, and the Americans still have one extremely high-value hostage in their possession, Meng Wanzhou. Canada, it seems, is determined to send Ms. Meng to the United States, and she is bound to suffer the same fate as the Alstom executive Mr. Pierucci, who was sent to prison for serious criminals. The Trudeau regime has always justified the kidnapping of Meng as a function of Canada's judicial independence. But many experts would say that Canada is just a pawn in the USA's war on Chinese tech, and according to Canadian law, the Attorney General can make a final decision on whether or not to extradite after the trial is completed. I hope this video has been able to shed some light on how the US forcibly maintains its dominance by taking down world-leading industries from Japan to Europe. Whether or not the world's best 5G tech, made in China, will meet the same fate is really up to us, everyday people, and our ability to question the narrative presented by Western-controlled media. Or will we again be bamboozled into another endless and pointless American war? Please share this video so more people know the truth. You can also support me through WeChat Pay, as I spent approximately 40 to 50 hours editing this. Also, this documentary was based on this video, which you can check out here in the link. Peace and love.